In a world where love is measured by rules and appearances, two women dare to embrace chaos, passion, and the life they were meant to live, messy, fearless, and unforgettable. Clara Whitmore had mastered the art of order. Her days were carefully arranged: wake at 6:30, 2 cups of coffee with exactly 1 sugar each, the morning paper, then the tube to Mayfair where she worked as assistant curator at the Mayfair Modern Gallery. By the time she unlocked the glass doors, she was already composed, every hair tucked neatly into place, every emotion neatly tucked away. The gallery suited her. Its whitewashed walls and silent halls mirrored the way she lived, clean, unobtrusive, predictable. She liked that the paintings spoke louder than people did. She liked that she could disappear into the frames and no one would question it. On Thursdays, the gallery was always quiet. Most visitors came on weekends, when the air smelled faintly of perfume and the footsteps of patrons echoed against the marble. Clara often found Thursdays restful. She could catalogue at her own pace, pause before the pieces she secretly adored, and let herself breathe. But that Thursday was different. The front doors opened with a gust of cool March air, and in walked a woman who didn't belong to the gallery's usual world of tailored suits and muted whispers. She wore a long coat splattered with dried paint, her chestnut hair escaping whatever attempt had been made to pin it back. She didn't drift through the room the way most visitors did. She prowled, eyes darting from canvas to canvas with a restless kind of hunger. Clara straightened instinctively, smoothing the lapel of her blazer. Another eccentric, she thought. Mayfair attracted them sometimes, dreamers with no real eye for art. But then the woman stopped before a sketch most visitors passed without notice. It was an untitled drawing, tucked in the far corner of the gallery, a reclining woman, all sharp lines and restless energy. Not beautiful in the conventional sense. Not polite. But alive. The woman tilted her head and spoke without turning. "You hide the good pieces in the back." Clara blinked. "Pardon me?" "This one." The stranger gestured at the sketch. Her voice was low, tinged with something, French, maybe? "It has blood in it. Everything else here feels restrained." Clara hesitated, caught off guard. "Most people don't notice this one." "Most people don't know what they're looking for," the woman replied easily, turning to face her at last. Her eyes were dark, sharp, and unafraid. "But you do. Don't you?" Clara felt something tighten in her chest. She had noticed the sketch, of course. She had fought to keep it on display when the director wanted to put up something more fashionable. She looked at it almost daily, drawn to its unapologetic roughness. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I suppose I do." The woman smiled, crooked, dangerous, like a match striking. She extended a paint-stained hand. "Elise." Clara hesitated only a moment before taking it. "Clara." Their hands lingered, just long enough for Clara to feel the faint smear of dried paint on her palm. And for the first time in years, the quiet Thursday felt anything but predictable. Elise came back the next day. Clara wasn't sure why she noticed so quickly, perhaps because Elise didn't drift through the gallery like other visitors. She moved with intent, like someone searching for a lost thing. Today, her coat was still splattered with paint, her hair even less tamed, and Clara found herself absurdly curious about the kind of life that left its mark so visibly on a person. "You again," Clara said, trying to keep her tone professional. Elise glanced over, eyes alight with mischief. "Careful, you almost sound disappointed." "I'm not," Clara began, then stopped herself. She wasn't. Not at all. "Do you work nearby?" "Work?" Elise's smile tilted. "If you can call painting in a freezing flat work, then yes. I'm nearby." Clara arched a brow. "You're an artist." "A painter," Elise corrected. "Though most people call me a dreamer, or worse. I prefer painter." Clara folded her hands behind her back. "And what brings you to the Mayfair Modern, then?" "Research? Inspiration?" "Coffee," Elise said. "Coffee?" Elise nodded toward the cafe across the street, visible through the gallery windows. I noticed you drink tea, though. Proper, isn't it? Milk, no sugar. Clara stared at her. How on earth? I notice things. Elise grinned, shameless. Like the way you always pause in front of that sketch before you leave for lunch. You're too careful to let anyone else see you, but I saw you. Clara's face grew warm. She hated being read so easily. And yet, she felt something else too. A spark of intrigue, of danger. Elise tilted her head. Have tea with me, Clara. It wasn't a question. It was a dare. Clara should have said no. She had a schedule, after all, catalog the upcoming exhibition, respond to donors, polish the labels for the new display. But the word that came out of her mouth was yes. The cafe was warm and noisy, a stark contrast to the hushed reverence of the gallery. Clara felt awkward at first, perched on the edge of her chair with her teacup, while Elise sprawled opposite her, gesturing wildly as she spoke. You ever notice, Elise said, that the best art is always made by people who refuse to follow rules? You can tell when someone's painting to be safe. It dies on the canvas. But when it's raw, when it's messy, that's when it breathes. Clara lifted her cup, hiding a small smile. And I suppose your work is raw? Elise smirked. You'll have to see it yourself to decide. Clara nearly choked on her tea. See it herself? The idea of stepping into this woman's world, into her paint-splattered flat, her chaotic orbit, was absurd. Dangerous. But as Elise leaned forward, elbows on the table, her dark eyes fixed on Clara's, the absurdity felt less like a warning and more like an invitation. For the first time in years, Clara wasn't thinking about the gallery's walls or her carefully ordered life. She was thinking about color, wild, uncontrolled color, and the woman across from her who seemed to carry it like a second skin. Clara told herself she wasn't going. It was foolish, stepping into the life of a stranger she had only just met. Foolish, and dangerous. She'd worked too hard to build her reputation, to be taken seriously in a world that already treated her like an ornament rather than a voice. And yet, a week later, she found herself standing in front of a crumbling brick building in Shoreditch, clutching her umbrella like a lifeline. Elise's text had been simple. Come see for yourself. The stairwell smelled of turpentine and damp. Clara's heels clicked against the metal steps as she climbed, her pulse a little too fast. When she reached the top floor, Elise was already there, barefoot, hair pulled into a messy knot, paint streaked across her cheek like war paint. You came, Elise said, almost surprised. I said I would, Clara replied, though her voice was quieter than she meant it to be. Elise's studio was chaos. Canvases leaned against every wall, some half-finished, others nothing more than violent bursts of color. Jars of brushes crowded the floor. The mattress in the corner was unmade, tangled sheets scattered with sketches. Clara froze in the doorway. This was not her world of polished white walls and carefully labeled placards. This was raw. Untamed. Alive. Well? Elise asked, watching her. Do I disappoint? Clara shook her head slowly. No. You overwhelm. Elise grinned at that. Good. Sit. She pointed to a stool in the middle of the room. Clara obeyed before she could think better of it. She felt awkward, perched stiffly as Elise circled her like a predator sizing up prey. Then Elise plucked a brush from a jar and set to work. What are you doing? Clara asked, though her voice came out softer than intended. Painting you, Elise said simply. Don't move. Clara's breath caught. She sat frozen, her hands pressed together in her lap, as Elise began to sketch broad, bold lines onto the canvas. The sound of the brush filled the silence, punctuated only by Elise's occasional hum. Minutes stretched into an hour. Clara's back ached from holding so still, but she didn't dare break the spell. Elise's eyes flicked up often, sharp and unflinching, studying her as though peeling back layers Clara hadn't realized she wore. Finally, Elise set down the brush. She turned the canvas toward her subject. Clara stared. The woman in the painting was not the Clara she saw in mirrors. This Clara's hair was unruly, her mouth slightly parted, her eyes wide with something between fear and desire. It was raw. Exposed. True. Clara faltered, her throat tight. That isn't me. It is, Elise said, stepping closer. It's the part of you you keep locked away. But I see her. Their eyes met. And for a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. Elise's paint-stained fingers brushed the back of her hand, light, tentative, but electric. Clara should have pulled away. She didn't. The kiss that followed was trembling, hesitant. But when Elise's lips met hers, Clara realized with a jolt of terrifying clarity, this was what she'd been waiting for, without ever admitting it. For a while, Clara managed to keep the two worlds separate. By day, she was still the efficient curator in her pressed blouses, navigating polite conversations with donors and carefully arranging exhibitions. By night, she was something else entirely, barefoot in Elise's studio, her jacket draped over a paint-smeared chair, her laughter startling even herself with its freedom. She thought she could balance it. But balance is fragile, and the cracks began sooner than she expected. It started at a gala. Crystal glasses clinked, and the air smelled of perfume too expensive for anyone to truly enjoy. Clara stood near the director, listening as a wealthy donor spoke in the condescending drawl that always made her teeth ache. "And what of that, friend of yours?" the donor asked, swirling his champagne. "That painter. What's her name?" "Elise?" Clara's throat tightened. "She's a talented young artist," she said carefully. The donor chuckled. "Talented? Perhaps. But dreadfully unrefined. Hardly the sort of company a curator of your promise should be keeping." His gaze slid over Clara, sharp and dismissive. "One hopes she's just a passing diversion." Clara forced a polite smile, the kind she had perfected over years of swallowing irritation. But inside, something hot and protective flared. Elise was not a diversion. She was. She was too much to explain. Later that night, when Clara arrived at Elise's studio still in her gala dress, Elise noticed her silence immediately. "What happened?" Elise asked, tugging off Clara's jacket, fingers brushing against bare shoulders. "Nothing." Clara shook her head, though her voice wavered. "Just the usual." Elise frowned, eyes narrowing. "The usual?" Whispers. Questions. "They don't understand." Elise pulled back slightly, studying her. "And do you care?" Clara hesitated. She wanted to say no. She wanted to be bold, reckless, like Elise. But her career, her carefully constructed life, they weren't so easy to dismiss. "They matter," she whispered at last. For the first time, Elise's expression cooled. "So you're ashamed of me?" "No." Clara's voice cracked. "Elise, But Elise had already turned away, her shoulders stiff. "You want me in the shadows. Hidden. Safe for you, invisible for them." The words struck deep because Clara knew, in some way, they were true. She had kissed Elise in the privacy of paint-stained walls, but she hadn't dared reach for her hand in public. She had defended her art in quiet conversations but had never spoken her name with pride in front of her peers. I don't want to lose everything I've worked for," Clara whispered. Elise faced her again, eyes burning. "And what if I'm the thing worth losing everything for?" The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Clara left late that night, her dress wrinkled, her heart unsettled. For the first time since meeting Elise, she felt the ache of distance between them, not measured in steps or hours, but in courage she had not yet found. The days that followed carried a silence Clara couldn't escape. Elise still called, still painted, still laughed too loud when they were together, but something between them had shifted. It was there in the way Elise's gaze lingered just a little too long, questioning. It was in the pauses Clara filled with polite words instead of confessions. At the gallery, Clara felt the weight of every glance from her colleagues. She imagined their whispers in the quiet halls, about the paint on her sleeve one morning, the way she seemed distracted, the name Elise that had slipped into a conversation when she wasn't careful enough. One evening, she found herself standing in Elise's studio, staring at a half-finished canvas. Bold strokes of crimson cut across a storm of gray. The figure in the center, unmistakably Clara, looked like she was drowning. "Do you like it?" Elise asked from behind her, voice flat. Clara swallowed. "It feels angry." "It is," Elise said simply. She set down her brush, wiping her hands on a rag already stained beyond salvation. "Because I don't know what I am to you, Clara." "A secret? A distraction? Something you'll forget when it gets too hard?" Clara turned quickly. "No. God, no. You're more than that. You're..." "Then why can't you show it?" Elise's voice cracked. "Why can't you say my name at those glittering galas? Why do you let them laugh at me, laugh at us, while you smile and sip your wine?" Clara's mouth opened, but no answer came. Because Elise was right. Because she was afraid. Afraid of losing the gallery, the reputation, the life she had built with such precision. Afraid of stepping into Elise's world with both feet and burning the bridges behind her. "I don't know how," Clara whispered at last. Elise closed her eyes, as if the words were worse than silence. When she looked again, her face was calm, but it was the brittle calm of someone about to break. "Then maybe you should go," Elise said quietly. The words landed like a knife. Clara's chest ached, but she didn't move, didn't speak, because deep down she knew Elise deserved more than half-truths and hidden kisses. So she left. Her heels echoed on the stairwell, and outside, London's night pressed close with rain-heavy air. For the first time in years, Clara felt utterly lost, like a painting abandoned in the wrong frame. Back in her flat, the silence was immaculate. Everything was in its place. Everything was neat. And yet, when Clara pressed her forehead to the cold glass of the window, she realized she had never felt so hollow. The days blurred into one another. Clara rose at the same hour, drank her coffee, buttoned her blouses with the same careful precision. She went to the gallery, answered emails, spoke to donors, catalogued works as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The silence of her flat no longer felt peaceful. It pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She would catch herself turning toward the door as if expecting Elise to burst in with paint on her cheek and a story about the busker she'd argued with on the way home. But the door stayed closed. At night, Clara tried to read, but the words slid off the page. The paintings she once loved seemed suddenly sterile. Even the sketch, the one that had first drawn Elise's gaze, mocked her now, as if asking why she'd chosen safety over truth. Her colleagues noticed, of course. "You look pale," one remarked casually over lunch. "Just tired," Clara lied. Tired of lying. One evening, Clara went to a donor's reception. The hall was filled with chandeliers and laughter that never reached anyone's eyes. She stood with a glass of wine, nodding at small talk, until someone mentioned Elise's name again. "That little painter still buzzing around," the woman sneered lightly. "Clara, darling, you'll outgrow her soon. Girls like that always burn out." Clara's throat burned, but she said nothing. She smiled, the way she always did. But when she went home that night, she threw the wine-stained program into the bin and pressed her fists against her eyes until tears finally spilled. She thought of Elise's studio, the clutter, the chaos, the smell of turpentine and rain. She thought of Elise's laugh, unrefined and unstoppable. She thought of the way Elise had looked at her, as if she were worth painting, worth risking everything for. And Clara realized, with a sharp ache, that her perfectly ordered life had never felt emptier. The next morning, she lingered at her flat window as rain began to fall. Drops streaked the glass, blurring the city beyond. She should have gone to work. Instead, she whispered to herself, words she hadn't dared say aloud until now. I miss her. The truth cracked something open. For the first time, Clara wondered if safety was nothing more than a gilded cage. And if so, perhaps it was time to break free. The rain began just after dusk, a slow drizzle that thickened into a downpour. By the time Clara left the gallery, the streets shone slick and silver beneath the lamps, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers all around her. She had her own umbrella, of course. She always did. But halfway down the pavement, she closed it. The rain fell hard against her face, cold and stinging, soaking through her blouse and coat. For once, she didn't care. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement as she walked faster, her thoughts a rush louder than the storm. She thought of Elise, of the studio's cluttered warmth, of laughter spilling over mugs of cheap coffee, of kisses that left her trembling. She thought of the hollow weeks since, the sterile quiet of her flat, the empty smiles at glittering galas. She thought of how she had chosen safety, and how it had cost her everything. Clara stopped in the middle of the street, chest heaving. Rain streamed down her face, and in the blur of light and water, she saw her reflection in a shop window, polished, composed, but hollow. And suddenly she was running. Her shoes splashed through puddles, her soaked skirt clinging to her legs. She clutched the useless umbrella against her side, breath ragged as she wove through the rain-heavy streets of Shoreditch. Her body moved faster than thought, guided by something rawer, truer, than reason. By the time she reached the crumbling building, her hair was plastered to her skin, her clothes dripping. She climbed the metal stairs 2 at a time, her heart hammering in her throat. She knocked once, hard. The door opened after a pause. Elise stood there barefoot, brush still in hand, streaks of cobalt smeared across her wrist. Her eyes widened at the sight of Clara, rain-soaked and trembling. What are you? I don't care, Clara cut in, breathless. I don't care about the whispers, or the donors, or the damned gallery. I care about you. The words tumbled out, messy, desperate, truer than anything she had said in years. For a long heartbeat, Elise only stared at her, chest rising and falling. Then, slowly, she let the brush fall from her hand. She stepped forward, rain catching in her hair as Clara stumbled into her arms. The kiss was fierce this time, no hesitation, no trembling. Rain and salt and paint mixed between them, and when Elise pulled her inside, Clara knew, this was where she belonged. Not in the neat silence of her flat. Not in the cold light of donors' approval. Here, in the chaos, in the mess, in Elise's arms. For the first time, Clara wasn't afraid of falling. Clara woke to the smell of paint and rain. For a moment she didn't move, eyes closed, listening. The patter of drops against the window. The faint creak of old floorboards. The low hum of Elise humming to herself, a tune without words. She opened her eyes and found herself in a bed that was hardly a bed at all, just a mattress thrown on the floor, sheets tangled and worn. Light from the grimy window spilled across scattered canvases, jars of brushes, plates forgotten on the floor. It was chaos. Disorder. Nothing like the immaculate flat she had left behind. And yet Clara felt a peace she had never known. Elise sat cross-legged on the floor, sketchbook balanced on her knees, charcoal staining her fingertips. She looked up when she felt Clara watching. Her smile was soft, unguarded. "Morning," Elise said. Clara's throat tightened. The word sounded like a promise. She sat up slowly, the sheet slipping from her shoulders. "You're drawing." "Always." Elise tilted the sketchbook to show her. A loose sketch of Clara asleep, her hair spilled across the pillow like a storm of ink. "Couldn't help myself." Clara laughed, startled at how light it felt. "You make me sound like some muse." "You are," Elise said simply. The words landed with more weight than Clara expected. She had spent her life being many things, curator, daughter, dutiful society figure, but never someone's muse. Never the reason behind another's art. She swung her feet to the floor, feeling the cool wood beneath her soles. She glanced around at the clutter, the canvases stacked too deep, the chaos of creation. "It's all so messy," she murmured. Elise grinned. "Messy is just beauty before it knows what it wants to be." Clara looked at her, really looked, and something in her chest shifted. For years she had arranged her world into neat frames, as if life itself could be curated like an exhibition. But here was beauty untamed, unfinished, unapologetic. And she wanted it. She rose, padding barefoot across the floor. Elise's hand reached for hers, fingers smudged with charcoal, warm against her skin. Clara didn't flinch at the stain left behind. She held tighter. The rest of the day unfolded without plan. They shared stale bread and bitter coffee, laughing when Clara tried to sweep crumbs off a canvas only to smudge wet paint instead. Elise teased her for her precision, and Clara teased back, until laughter turned to quiet, and quiet turned to kisses stolen between brushstrokes. For the first time in her life, Clara allowed herself to exist in the in-between, between order and chaos, silence and laughter, perfection and flaw. And she discovered that in the mess, there was a beauty she had never known. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm both fragile and intoxicating. Clara would spend long days at the gallery, smiling politely through meetings, then slip away at dusk to Elise's studio. There, her careful mask dissolved. She learned the way Elise painted through the night, barefoot and humming, brush strokes wild and certain. She learned how Elise drank her coffee black but stirred in too much sugar, how she swore under her breath in French when a line went wrong, how she left the window cracked open no matter the season because she needed to hear the world breathing. Clara found herself helping in small ways, stretching canvases, cleaning brushes, cataloging Elise's scattered sketches into neat stacks. Elise teased her for it, but there was gratitude in her smile, and Clara felt proud to be useful in a world that thrived on chaos. But beyond the walls of the studio, the world pressed closer. One evening, at a gallery dinner, a donor leaned across the table and murmured, "Clara, darling, people are talking. You vanish every night, and that painter girl's name keeps surfacing. Careful, or your reputation may stain by association." Clara smiled, as she always did, but her fork trembled in her hand. She told herself it didn't matter. Yet later, walking home through the polished streets, her stomach twisted. When she reached the studio, Elise was sprawled on the mattress, paint still streaking her arm, eyes bright with a half-formed idea. She leapt up the moment Clara entered, tugging her toward a half-finished canvas. "Look at it," Elise said breathlessly. "I think this one's alive." Clara tried to match her excitement, but the donor's words clung to her like smoke. She stared at the canvas, a storm of color, a rawness that unsettled her, and for the first time, she felt herself falter. Elise caught it. "What is it?" she asked softly. "Nothing," Clara lied. But Elise stepped closer, charcoal smudges on her face like war paint. "Don't do that. Not with me." Clara's chest ached. She wanted to confess everything, the whispers, the fear of losing her position, the terror of being seen. But the words tangled in her throat. Elise studied her, searching her eyes. Then she reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from Clara's cheek. "Whatever it is," she murmured, "don't let them steal this from us." Clara swallowed hard, nodding. But deep down, she knew cracks had begun to form, hairline fractures between the world she came from and the one she longed to stay in. And cracks, if left unattended, had a way of breaking everything apart. The invitation arrived on thick cream paper, slipped under the studio door like a secret. Elise picked it up first, frowning at the embossed lettering. The London Emerging Artists Exhibition, Winter Showcase. Her name was printed there in bold. Clara's breath caught. She knew the exhibition, every curator did. It was where collectors prowled, where critics sharpened their pens, where young artists were either blessed with notoriety or dismissed into obscurity. "They chose me," Elise whispered, stunned. "I didn't even submit. Someone must have seen the canvases I left at that co-op gallery last month." Clara's heart swelled with pride, but beneath it pulsed a sharp flicker of dread. This was it, the moment Elise's work would no longer live in the shadows of her studio but under the cold lights of scrutiny. And with that exposure came danger. Whispers would grow louder. People would talk. About the art. About Elise. About them. But Elise's joy was incandescent. She twirled around the room, hair flying, laughter spilling like music. Clara, do you know what this means? They'll see me. Really see me. Clara smiled, though her fingers twisted in her lap. Yes, she said softly. They will. The night of the exhibition, the gallery gleamed with chandeliers and polished floors. Clara walked in beside Elise, her hand brushing against hers in the crowded foyer. Elise wore a dress borrowed from a friend, deep green that clung in all the right places, her hair pulled back with careless elegance. She looked radiant, untamed, utterly herself. Clara, in her tailored black gown, felt every eye turn. She had attended countless exhibitions, but never as part of something so precariously personal. Elise's paintings hung in a cluster along one wall, canvases alive with color and storm, raw edges that drew people closer. But it was the final piece that stilled the room. It was Clara. Not polished, not posed, but Clara as Elise had seen her, hair loose, lips parted as if on the cusp of confession, eyes wide with longing. The brushstrokes trembled with intimacy, with a kind of truth that could not be mistaken. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A critic murmured something about ferocious vulnerability. Another whispered, "Who is she?" Clara felt heat climb her neck. Her world, so carefully curated, tilted dangerously. But when she looked at Elise, standing proud and unflinching beside her work, Clara felt something else rise stronger than fear. Pride. Love. The undeniable pull of a life less safe, but infinitely more real. As the room buzzed, Elise leaned close, her voice a low whisper meant only for Clara. "Now they see you too." And in that moment, Clara realized there was no hiding anymore. The frame had been shattered. The world would know. But so would she. The exhibition ended in a blur of clinking glasses and sharp voices. Clara walked home with Elise, her hand discreetly linked through hers, the city's winter air biting at their cheeks. For one night, the fear had been drowned out by applause. But the morning brought consequences. Clara arrived at the gallery early, her hair still damp from the hurried shower, her chest buzzing with unease. She barely stepped into her office before Margaret, the board chair, was waiting. "Clara," Margaret said, her tone clipped as a blade. "We need to talk." The words unfurled into a quiet storm. "A painting had caused a stir, a likeness of you," Margaret said, as though the words themselves were dangerous. Donors were whispering. Rumors of Clara's entanglement with an artist from Shoreditch had reached ears that mattered. "You must understand," Margaret pressed, her pearls gleaming under the office light, "your position depends on discretion. Appearances. You can't allow yourself to be the subject of gossip." Clara stood tall, though her hands trembled behind her back. For years she had lived by these rules, curating not just art but herself. But now, with Elise's eyes still vivid in her mind, she found herself unable to apologize. Margaret leaned closer. "Decide what matters more, your career, or a passing infatuation." The word infatuation sliced deep. Clara said nothing. She let Margaret leave with her warnings echoing in the silence. That evening, Clara returned to the studio heavy with the weight of the day. Elise was sprawled on the mattress, sketching absent-mindedly. She looked up, smile lighting her face, but faltered when she saw Clara's expression. "What happened?" Elise asked softly. Clara sat, burying her face in her hands. "They know. About us. About me." Elise reached for her, but Clara pulled back, the distance between them suddenly wide. "They called it an infatuation," Clara whispered bitterly. "As if you're a phase. As if we are." Elise's jaw tightened. "And what do you think?" Clara looked up then, tears brimming. "I think you're the truest thing I've ever had." Silence stretched, thick and fragile. Elise touched Clara's cheek, her thumb smudged with graphite. Then let them talk. Let them choke on their own whispers. We're not theirs to define. Clara wanted to believe it. But Margaret's words lingered. Decide what matters more. And Clara knew, the cost of truth was only beginning to show itself. The weeks after the exhibition unfolded like a tightening noose. At the gallery, Clara noticed the subtle shifts first: donors canceling appointments, colleagues avoiding her gaze, conversations falling silent when she entered a room. The portrait of her that had stunned the exhibition now circulated in whispers, its intimacy dissected by those who claimed to admire art but feared the truth behind it. Margaret called her in again. "This is untenable," she said flatly. "Your personal life is bleeding into your professional one. We cannot have our reputation compromised. Step back from this, artist. End it. Or resign." The ultimatum landed like a stone in Clara's chest. For years, the gallery had been her cathedral, its white walls, its quiet reverence, its promise of permanence. And now it stood opposite Elise, the woman who made her laugh in the middle of messy mornings, who painted her not as she appeared, but as she was. At night, Clara lay awake on Elise's mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling while Elise slept beside her. The storm inside her grew louder, one path paved with security, the other with love so unsteady it frightened her. One evening, she rose quietly, dressing in the dark. She needed air, space, silence. She walked the streets until her shoes were soaked with rain and her coat clung heavy against her. The weeks after the exhibition unfolded like a tightening noose. At the gallery, Clara noticed the subtle shifts first: donors canceling appointments, colleagues avoiding her gaze, conversations falling silent when she entered a room. The portrait of her that had stunned the exhibition now circulated in whispers, its intimacy dissected by those who claimed to admire art but feared the truth behind it. Margaret called her in again. "This is untenable," she said flatly. "Your personal life is bleeding into your professional one. We cannot have our reputation compromised. Step back from this, artist. End it. Or resign." The ultimatum landed like a stone in Clara's chest. For years, the gallery had been her cathedral, its white walls, its quiet reverence, its promise of permanence. And now it stood opposite Elise, the woman who made her laugh in the middle of messy mornings, who painted her not as she appeared, but as she was. At night, Clara lay awake on Elise's mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling while Elise slept beside her. The storm inside her grew louder, one path paved with security, the other with love so unsteady it frightened her. One evening, she rose quietly, dressing in the dark. She needed air, space, silence. She walked the streets until her shoes were soaked with rain and her coat clung heavy against her. The next morning, Clara woke alone. Sunlight spilled across the messy studio floor, illuminating brushes, splattered canvases, and the faint scent of turpentine that clung to the air like memory. Elise was nowhere in sight. Clara's stomach sank. She didn't remember leaving, did she? Her mind raced back over the night, over her hesitations, her fear, her silence. And suddenly, the truth she had avoided all along crashed into her: she had chosen safety over love. She found Elise in the kitchen, staring out the window, a mug of coffee trembling in her hands. The quiet was unbearable. "Elise," Clara began, but the sound of her own voice felt weak, defeated. Elise turned slowly, eyes dark, tired, hurt. "You needed to think," she said, voice calm but brittle. "And in your thinking, you chose." Clara's throat tightened. The gallery. Elise set the mug down, letting it clatter against the counter. "I thought we were, more than whispers and rules. I thought you wanted this as much as I did." "I do," Clara whispered, stepping closer. "God, I do. But..." "No, Clara," Elise cut her off sharply. "No buts. You can't have me in halves. You can't hide me behind walls, or behind polite smiles, or behind the fear of what others will say." The next morning, Clara woke alone. The words landed with a force Clara hadn't anticipated. All the compromises she had made, all the careful measures to keep her life intact, they were meaningless here. Elise was not a compromise. She never could be. Clara reached for her, but Elise recoiled. "I can't be a secret," she said, voice shaking. "I won't. Not for you, not for anyone." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She had never felt so powerless, so painfully aware of what she had risked losing. The woman who had made her laugh, who had painted her as she had never allowed herself to be seen, was standing just out of reach. And Clara had placed a wall between them. Elise turned away, fingers tightening around the mug. "I need to know you can fight for us," she said quietly. "Not for what's safe, but for what's real. And if you can't..." The sentence hung. Clara swallowed, choking back sobs. She wanted to fight, wanted to throw herself into Elise's arms and never let go. But Margaret's ultimatum, the whispers, the carefully curated life she had built, it all held her frozen. Clara faltered. "I can't." And just like that, the fracture became a chasm. Elise's eyes, so bright with love and hurt, filled with tears she refused to let fall. She shook her head. "Then you've made your choice." Without another word, Elise walked toward the door. She paused only to glance back once, a shadow of hope lingering for a heartbeat. Then she was gone. Clara sank to the floor, the studio suddenly vast and hollow. The walls that had once held her world together now seemed to close in with the weight of absence. And for the first time, she understood the cost of choosing safety over love. The city outside Clara's flat was gray, wet, and indifferent. She walked its streets like a ghost, her heels clicking against slick pavement, the umbrellas of strangers forming a moving canopy around her. The world was alive with motion, and yet she felt detached, suspended in a quiet grief that clung to her bones. She replayed the argument with Elise over and over, each detail sharper than the last, the tremble in Elise's voice, the way her hands had clenched around the coffee mug, the almost imperceptible crack in her composure. Clara knew she had broken something precious, perhaps irreparably. Back in her flat, the silence was suffocating. The walls, once comforting in their order, now mocked her. Every perfectly aligned book, every polished surface, every framed certificate whispered the same truth: she had chosen safety over love. Days bled into nights, each one heavier than the last. Clara tried to fill the void with work, with meetings, with polite dinners, but every smile felt brittle, every conversation hollow. She tried to see Elise's world in memory, the studio, the chaos, the laughter, but it was like chasing smoke. The longer she reached, the further it slipped away. One evening, she found herself standing before the gallery window, watching the rain streak across the glass. The city reflected back at her in shimmering fragments, distorted and imperfect. And in that fractured reflection, she saw the truth she had been avoiding: her carefully constructed life was meaningless without the person who made her heart feel untamed, alive, and messy. She thought of Elise's smile, the way she had painted Clara's soul onto canvas without asking permission. She thought of the storm-soaked night when she had finally let herself run to her, when fear had been drowned in rain and desperation. Clara pressed her forehead to the cold glass, and whispered into the empty streets. "I can't do this without you." It was a confession, a surrender, and a plea. And somewhere deep in her chest, a spark flickered, the realization that love, real and uncompromising, was worth every risk, every whispered judgment, every shattered expectation. She knew what she had to do. Clara didn't hesitate. The next morning, she rose before dawn, the city still dark and wet from overnight rain. She dressed quickly, pulling on a coat that no longer felt like armor, but like a second skin. Every step toward Elise's studio felt like a small rebellion against the life she had built on caution. The streets were empty, save for the occasional cab splashing through puddles. Clara's pulse thrummed in her ears, loud enough to drown out the world. She clutched her umbrella, though this time she didn't mind if the rain soaked through. It was a baptism of sorts, a washing away of all the fear and restraint that had kept her from the only person who truly mattered. When she reached the building, the metal stairs loomed before her like a challenge. She climbed them two at a time, breath quick, heart pounding, until she reached the top floor. The door opened before she could knock. Elise stood there, hair still messy, paint smudged on her arms, eyes wide with caution. "Clara," Elise whispered, as if afraid this was a dream she might lose. "I'm here," Clara said, stepping inside, closing the door behind her. "I'm done hiding. I'm done choosing safety over us." Elise's eyes searched hers, disbelief mingled with hope. "You mean it?" Clara nodded, voice trembling but firm. "Every word. I don't care about whispers, or donors, or what anyone else thinks. I choose you. I choose this life, messy, chaotic, beautiful. I choose us." Elise's lips quivered as she reached for Clara, fingers brushing paint-stained skin. "You have no idea what you just said to me." "You'll show me," Clara replied, a small, shaky smile breaking through the fear. And then, without another word, they collided in a kiss that was fierce, desperate, and freeing. The storm outside mirrored the one inside the studio, the wild energy of brushes on canvas, laughter spilling over, hearts pounding in sync. When they finally pulled back, Elise rested her forehead against Clara's. "We'll face the world together," she murmured. "Yes," Clara whispered, the word absolute. "Together." For the first time, the carefully curated life Clara had known felt less real than the chaos she embraced now. In Elise's arms, in the paint and the storm, she found the life she had always wanted, the messy, beautiful, uncompromising truth of love. And this time, she wasn't afraid to fall. The days after Clara's return to Elise were a blur of color, laughter, and quiet discoveries. They settled into a rhythm, unplanned and untamed. Mornings were spent in the studio, brushes scratching against canvas, the smell of turpentine mingling with coffee. Clara learned to embrace the mess, the spilled paint, the scattered sketches, the half-finished canvases that littered every corner. "It's beautiful chaos," she said one morning, stepping carefully over a puddle of blue. Elise grinned, paint on her cheek glinting in the sunlight. "It's life. Nothing worth having is neat and tidy, Clara." Evenings were for quiet intimacy. They cooked together in Elise's tiny kitchen, laughter echoing off the brick walls, the world outside reduced to the hum of traffic and the patter of rain. Clara discovered joy in small things, watching Elise work, feeling her hand brush against hers, sharing whispered confessions as the city slumbered around them. And yet, the outside world never fully disappeared. Whispers still floated through the gallery corridors, and some donors still questioned Clara's choices. But she no longer feared them. Each challenge became a brushstroke, adding depth and texture to the life she was creating with Elise. One afternoon, they stood together in front of a completed canvas, a riot of color and emotion. It was the largest piece Elise had ever painted, and in its center was Clara, not idealized, not polished, but fierce, alive, and untamed. Clara ran her fingers over the strokes, feeling the energy Elise had poured into every line. "It's us," she murmured. Elise's hand found hers, intertwining fingers. "It's everything we've survived to make. Every risk, every fear, it's here. And it's beautiful." Clara smiled, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "It's our masterpiece." In that moment, the gallery, the donors, the cautious life she had once clung to, all of it felt distant, almost unreal. The only thing that mattered was the woman beside her, the storm of paint and love they had built together, and the truth they refused to compromise. The mess, the chaos, the unbridled beauty of it, it was theirs. And Clara, for the first time, felt entirely, unapologetically alive. The months that followed were a testament to courage and love. Clara and Elise carved out a world of their own, one built not on perfection or appearances, but on honesty, chaos, and shared dreams. The studio became both home and sanctuary, walls covered in canvases, shelves cluttered with brushes, jars, and books. Each corner held a memory, a story, a moment of laughter or quiet revelation. Clara still went to the gallery, but she no longer hid the truth of her heart. Slowly, colleagues adapted, whispers faded when faced with the steady strength of her choice. Donors remained cautious, but Clara discovered a new confidence in asserting herself, defending not just her work but her life. And Elise thrived. Invitations to exhibitions grew, her art recognized not just for skill but for the raw honesty that flowed from each canvas. Together, they celebrated milestones, small and large, with paint-stained hands, shared cups of bitter coffee, and laughter that echoed long into the night. They also faced challenges. The world was not always kind to love that defied expectations. There were moments of fear, moments when doubt crept in, when old voices threatened to pull Clara back to the life she had almost chosen. But each time, they faced it together, building strength from the vulnerability they had once tried to hide. One rainy evening, Clara watched Elise paint a new canvas, light spilling across the studio, the room alive with color and motion. Elise paused, looking over her shoulder. "You see it, don't you? Our life. Every mess, every chaos, it's here." The months that followed were a testament to courage and love. Clara stepped closer, brushing her fingers against Elise's. "I see it. And I choose it. Every day." They kissed, the world outside forgotten, the only sound the rhythm of brush on canvas and hearts beating in sync. In time, their love became a legacy, one painted in bold strokes and fearless colors. Friends, family, even the city around them came to recognize the power of truth, the beauty of lives fully embraced. And in the quiet, private moments between them, Clara and Elise discovered something deeper than passion, a life built on trust, courage, and unwavering devotion. The life they chose was not easy. It was messy, unpredictable, and beautiful beyond measure. And for Clara, that was the point. Years passed, carrying the rhythm of a life fully lived. Clara and Elise built their world together, layer by layer, stroke by stroke. The studio had grown, a sprawling, vibrant testament to their shared creativity, their love, and the choices they had refused to compromise. Canvases filled every wall, a mosaic of triumphs, struggles, laughter, and tears. They traveled sometimes, exhibitions and commissions pulling them across countries, but they always returned to the studio, the heartbeat of their life. Rain or shine, chaos or calm, it was home. One morning, Clara watched from the window as Elise painted, sunlight catching the colors like fire. A small figure laughed in the corner, a child with Elise's dark hair and Clara's wide, inquisitive eyes. Their daughter, a living blend of both worlds, ran between easels and canvases, leaving tiny footprints in splashes of paint. Clara's chest swelled. This was the life they had chosen, messy, chaotic, unpredictable, and undeniably theirs. Every risk, every heartbreak, every stolen moment of courage had led here, to love, family, and a home alive with creativity and warmth. Elise turned toward her, paint on her hands and cheeks, eyes sparkling. "You're smiling." Clara laughed softly. "I am. Because we did it. We made this life. Every piece of it." Elise crossed the room, taking Clara's hand in hers. Their daughter ran to them, arms outstretched, and they lifted her together, spinning in the golden light. In that moment, the past, the fear, the doubts, the fractured choices, felt distant, like a shadow behind the glow of their life. They had survived, loved, and built a legacy in colors too bold to ignore. Clara rested her head against Elise's shoulder, listening to their daughter's laughter, feeling the warmth of paint, rain, and sunlight mingling in the studio. She thought of the first stormy night she had run to Elise, heart pounding, fear forgotten in the rush toward truth. And now, years later, she understood fully, the life they had chosen, together, was their masterpiece. Bold, messy, beautiful. Perfectly, irrevocably theirs. Turn on notifications bell to never miss a story. Share your thoughts in the comments, we love hearing from our viewers.